In the spring of 1886 in Ashton-under-Lyne, Lancashire, England, a woman named Mary Ann Britland followed the same narrow route each morning through the mill-town streets. She was 39, born Mary Ann Haig in Bolton, and had married Thomas Britland at St. Michael's Church in 1866. Soon after the marriage, 2 daughters were born, Elizabeth, Hannah Britland, the elder, and Susanna Britland, a few years younger. The family lived respectably for many years in small rented rooms near the factories, moving later to Turner Lane, a row of modest brick houses within sight of the Ashton Chemical Works. Each day began in steady order. Mary Ann left before 8 for her shift at the cotton mill, returning in the evening to prepare the meal and help for several hours at a nearby public house. Thomas worked variable hours, sometimes assisting there as well. The elder daughter, Elizabeth, 19, managed the household while her mother was out. Neighbours described them as quiet and industrious. The move to Turner Lane had been recent, and they were thought to be improving their condition. Yet early that year, household money grew short. Mary Ann began to ask about small insurance policies and visited local chemists for domestic remedies. In February 1886, the poison register at Harrison's pharmacy recorded her name beside a purchase of Harrison's vermin killer, a preparation then common for controlling rats. It contained strychnine and arsenic substances legally sold if entered under signature. The shop clerk later stated that the entry appeared regular and the payment was made in the usual way. Nothing in her routine suggested alarm. She washed linen on Mondays, took supplies from the market midweek, and attended chapel when work permitted. Her younger daughter Susanna often visited friends nearby. By March, the rhythm of the household remained unchanged. Elizabeth fell ill, suddenly complaining of spasms and weakness. Mary Ann sent for the doctor, boiled water, and measured powders from the cupboard. When death came, it was entered as natural. The burial followed quietly, the neighbours offering small condolences. The next morning the mill whistle sounded across Ashton-under-Lyne, and Mary Ann Britland resumed her work. After the burial of her daughter in March 1886, Mary Ann Britland continued her days in a manner that drew no attention. She rose early, drew water from the yard pump, and went to the mill before the whistle at 8. The younger girl, Susanna, stayed some nights with friends on the next street, while Thomas Britland kept irregular hours between casual labour and the public house on Turner Lane. By the first week of April, Mary Ann again called at Kilvington's chemist. The entry in the register bore her name and the same purpose for rats. The clerk remembered that she spoke plainly and seemed in no haste. She signed as before, paid 2 shillings, and left with the small packet folded in brown paper. At home she prepared meals for her husband, boiled milk for his stomach pains, and sat with him at the table under the low gaslight. Neighbours heard ordinary talk through the open window, plans to manage the rent, the coming fair, the price of flour. On Sundays she attended chapel as usual. During those weeks Thomas Britland was said to have complained of dizziness and sudden stiffness in the limbs. Mary Ann fetched the local doctor, who prescribed a tonic. Nothing more was thought of it. The house remained quiet, except for the mill bells. In early May her visits to the Dixons next door became more frequent. Thomas Dixon, who worked at the gasworks, often called in for tea. His wife, Mary Dixon, was friendly with the Britlands and helped with washing when Mary Ann worked late. The families had shared errands for years, borrowing small items between the 2 kitchens. On May 3rd, 1886, Thomas Britland was taken suddenly ill after the evening meal. The doctor was summoned again, but arrived too late. The symptoms, stiffness, convulsion, a drawn face, were attributed to a seizure. Death was registered under epileptic fit. Mary Ann received a small payment from the insurance agent within the week. She did not withdraw from routine. The following days she was seen at the market, speaking with the same clerks, counting her coins carefully. The chemist's boy later recalled that she inquired again about the cost of poison, saying there were rats in the Dixon house next door. Through May she continued to visit the Dixons in the evenings. The conversations were short about cleaning water tanks, the weather, the coming Whitsuntide holiday. On May 14th, Mary Dixon complained of cramps after tea. Neighbours helped to fetch the doctor, but the illness moved swiftly. By nightfall, she was dead. At Turner Lane, shutters were drawn on both houses. The same doctor signed a second certificate. No suspicion was yet raised. Mary Ann closed the doors. tidied the table, and returned to her work the next morning. By the 3rd week of May 1886, Turner Lane grew unusually quiet. The shutters of 2 houses remained closed, and few people saw Mary Ann Britland outside except on her way to the mill. The laughter that once drifted from the Dixons' kitchen was gone. Inside the Britland house only Mary Ann and her younger daughter remained. Neighbours began to remark upon the silence. Susanna Britland stayed often with relatives, saying her mother preferred the house to be still. When asked at the corner shop about the Dixons, Mary Ann answered that poor Mrs. Dixon had died suddenly and that Mr. Dixon was much afflicted. She spoke briefly, paid for candles, and left. In the evenings she was observed crossing the narrow path between the 2 homes, sometimes carrying a kettle or a covered dish. Thomas Dixon, newly widowed, received her help with washing and meals. The light from his window burned late. Yet something unsettled the street. John Law, who kept the small coffee stall nearby, later told police that he had called on Dixon one afternoon to discuss funeral matters and found Mary Ann already there. Their conversation turned toward poison, and he recalled her asking what substance might leave no mark. At the time he thought little of it. By the end of May, the air in Turner Lane carried unease. People avoided passing too close. The deaths of Elizabeth Thomas and Mary Dixon had come within 10 weeks of one another, all in adjoining houses. Still no official action had been taken. The local doctor's certificate stood unquestioned. It was not until mid-June that constables returned to the street. They came quietly in the early morning when few were about. The chemist's registers had been examined, and the repeated entries of Mary Ann Britland's name were now under review. That evening she did not appear at the public house. The lamps along Turner Lane flickered in a thin mist, as doors closed early. In the first days of June 1886 the calm on Turner Lane broke. The registrar's notes for the 3 recent deaths had been reviewed by the borough authorities, and irregularities appeared in their order. Each certificate bore the same doctor's name. Each address stood within a few yards of the other. At dawn 2 constables and the coroner's officer arrived at the churchyard with a covered cart. They spoke little. One unfolded the canvas screens, another read the warrant aloud, and the third checked the names on the wooden markers before the men began to dig. Their boots sank slightly into the damp soil, the sound dull and rhythmic. Behind the low wall, townspeople gathered. A woman with her shawl drawn close whispered that it must be for the Dixon woman. Another asked if there had been poison, or if some neighbour had spoken against the family. A man with a clay pipe said only they would not open a grave without cause. Someone shushed him, and the talk fell back to murmurs. By mid-morning the coffin was raised under the grey light and placed upon the cart. The constables lifted it without a word. One brushed the mud from his gloves before covering the load. The small group outside the wall drew back as they passed. Later that week the chemical examiner in Manchester received the sealed samples. His first notes confirmed traces of strychnine in the remains of Mary Dixon. The result was sent by telegram to the borough office, and further orders followed. The constables went again to Harrison's pharmacy. The shop doorbell rang once. Inside bottles lined the shelves in neat rows. The pharmacist produced the poison register without being asked. 2 signatures appeared: Mary Ann Britland for rats. At Kilvington's chemist, a 3rd entry was found written in the same hand. The findings were laid before the coroner on June 16th. A 2nd exhumation was approved for Elizabeth and Thomas Britland. As the carts left the yard, the onlookers at the wall spoke quietly again. 3 coffins now, one said. Aye, there'll be reason behind it, replied another. The air hung heavy, the tools striking in measured rhythm until the ground gave way. By evening, the warrants were signed for arrest. The examination of the exhumed remains took place at the Manchester Medical School under the direction of Dr. Thomas Scattergood, the borough analyst. The work began in the early hours of June 17, 1886. The small laboratory smelt faintly of disinfectant and damp stone. Glass vessels were arranged in order on the table labels set by hand in black ink. The first samples came from Mary Dixon. Dr. Scattergood measured portions of stomach content, added reagents, and recorded the reaction. Within minutes the telltale crystal form of strychnine appeared under the lens. He repeated the test twice. The same pattern returned. The report entered in his notebook read, "Presence of strychnine quantity sufficient to cause death." Attention then turned to the remains of Elizabeth Hannah Britland and Thomas Britland, delivered the same day. The analysis for each revealed deposits of arsenic confirmed by the standard Marsh test. The findings were conveyed by sealed document to the Home Office and copied into the Borough Record. In the examiner's view, the similarity of symptoms and timing indicated deliberate administration. Investigators reconstructed the sequence from March to May. In February, Mary Ann Britland signed the poison register at Harrison's pharmacy. In April, another purchase was recorded at Kilvington's chemist. In May, both her husband and neighbour died under identical conditions. Each signature corresponded to the death that followed within weeks. The chemist clerks identified her handwriting beyond doubt. The constables traced small insurance receipts made out to her name, totalling £10 for each of the deceased. The policies had been taken out within the previous year. The payments were modest, yet together formed a pattern that matched the chemist's entries. When presented with the findings, Mary Ann Britland was said to have listened quietly. In her statement taken at the Ashton police station, she denied wrongdoing but confirmed every purchase. "There were rats about the yard," she said. She added that she had mixed the poison in water and kept it in a tin box, but insisted she never used it within the house. Dr. Scattergood's final report concluded that the deaths of all three, Elizabeth Thomas and Mary Dixon, were consistent with poisoning by arsenic and strychnine respectively. The file was endorsed by the coroner, Mr. Hollingworth, on June 25, 1886, and forwarded to the assizes. The instruments were cleaned, the tables wiped down, and the samples sealed away. Outside, the evening air of Manchester hung cool and still, carrying the sound of distant machinery through the open window. By the final week of June 1886, the inquiry spread beyond Turner Lane. Detectives from Manchester arrived to verify each purchase and trace the movement of the poisons from shop to house. The constables searched the Britland dwelling under warrant. The kitchen table was cleared first. In the cupboard above it they found two small tins, one marked Harrison's Vermin Killer, the other unlabelled. Both contained residue of white powder. A worn teaspoon lay beside them. Each item was wrapped in brown paper sealed with wax and conveyed to the laboratory for testing. Downstairs, a ledger book showed entries for insurance payments and household bills. On the last page, a single note read, "Turner Lane, paid June 3rd. Nothing more. A constable folded the book into an envelope and added it to the evidence list. Outside, the neighbours watched from their doorways. One woman whispered that Mary Ann had always kept her kitchen neat. Another said she never spoke much, only nodded when passing. The sound of drawers being opened and shut carried faintly through the open window. At the station, the examiner compared the powder from the tins with laboratory samples. Both tested positive for strychnine. The label on one lid matched the batch sold at Harrison's in February. The alignment of handwriting and chemical proof left no gap for doubt. A formal statement was drawn that afternoon. It listed the 3 deaths, the poison purchases, and the exhumation results. The file was signed by Superintendent Bent, submitted to the coroner, and transferred to the Manchester Assizes for trial. When the officers returned to the house, they locked the door and posted notice of seizure. Susanna Britland had already been sent to stay with relatives. A neighbour fed the cat that lingered by the step. At dusk, a cart left the police yard, carrying the sealed parcels of evidence toward the city. The driver said little, only flicked the reins once. The road turned wet with drizzle as the lamps came on along the Ashton Road. The trial of Mary Ann Britland opened on July 22, 1886, at the Manchester Assizes before Mr. Justice Cave. The courtroom was close and still, the summer air heavy beneath the high windows. The prisoner stood in a dark dress, her hands clasped before her eyes, lowered toward the rail. The proceedings began with the reading of the indictment, 3 counts of wilful murder, of Elizabeth Hannah Britland, Thomas Britland, and Mary Dixon. The charges were read in full, each date, each address, each cause of death. When asked to plead, she answered softly, "Not guilty." Dr. Thomas Scattergood, the medical examiner, was the first to give evidence. He stated that he had conducted the chemical analysis of the remains and found arsenic in both Britland's strychnine in Mary Dixon. In his opinion, the quantities were consistent with deliberate administration. He described his process carefully, how the reagents were added, how the crystals formed, how the results were verified by repetition. Mr. Harrison, chemist of Ashton-under-Lyne, followed. He produced the poison register and pointed to the entries signed Mary Ann Britland for rats. The handwriting was her own. A second clerk from Kilvington's chemist confirmed a later sale in April of the same year. John Law, keeper of the coffee stall, testified next. He recalled the conversation in May when Mrs. Britland had asked what substance might leave no trace. "It was said in passing," he told the court, "but it struck me after the last death." Neighbours from Turner Lane were then called. They spoke of her ordinary manner, her visits to the Dixons' house, and the quiet in the street after each burial. One said she had seen Mrs. Britland carry tea to the Dixon kitchen on the evening before the death. Throughout, the accused remained composed. She asked no questions and conferred briefly with her solicitor between witnesses. When invited to speak, she said only that she had bought poison for rats and had never used it against any person. After brief deliberation, the jury returned with their finding guilty of wilful murder of Mary Dixon. The other charges were not pursued. The judge spoke in formal tone, noting the deliberate pattern of acts and the trust broken within her own home. Sentence of death was pronounced according to the law. As she was led away, Mary Ann Britland turned once toward the gallery and said, "I am innocent." Her voice was steady, almost inaudible. The court adjourned at 5. Outside, the street had emptied, the sound of carts on wet stone fading into the evening. After the verdict at the Manchester Assizes, the city talked. The case appeared in the morning papers under headlines set in heavy type: "Woman, sentenced to death at Strangeways, the Ashton poisonings." Columns followed in the Manchester Guardian and the Times, recounting the evidence and the calm manner of the accused. At the corner, public houses, the talk ran without pause. Some said the woman had acted from jealousy, others that money must have driven her. A few argued that the doctors had mistaken the symptoms, that such poisons could come from bad food or medicines. Each voice held a theory. Each evening produced another. In Turner Lane, reporters moved between doors, taking notes of neighbours who would speak. Mrs. Partington, who had once worked beside Mary Ann at the mill, told a young journalist that she had been quiet and careful, one of the sort you'd trust with a child. Another neighbour refused to give her name, but said she had often seen Mary Ann and Thomas Dixon talking at the gate after dark. The sentence, "It was bound to end in trouble," appeared in several papers the next day. Letters to editors called for tighter control of poison sales. One writer in the Ashton Herald claimed that chemists should keep stricter watch over those who purchased arsenic, noting that a signature alone is too thin a safeguard. Another defended the shopkeepers, saying that any householder might lawfully buy vermin killer and that suspicion should not rest upon the trade. For a few days, rumour touched others. It was said that Thomas Dixon would be charged, but the police denied it. He had given his statement and been released. A labourer at the gasworks was briefly questioned after boasting that he knew more than the papers, yet his words proved empty. By the end of July, the noise lessened. The press turned to other matters: the weather, the harvest, the rail disputes. Turner Lane returned to its old stillness. The shutters were open again. Children played in the narrow road, and only the black drape on one door remained. A final note appeared in the Evening Mail a week before the execution. The condemned woman, Mary Ann Britland, maintains her innocence and attends chapel service daily. Her conduct is quiet and respectful. When the issue passed from the stands, few spoke of her name again. In the weeks following the verdict, official memoranda began to circulate between the Home Office and the Lancashire Constabulary. The case of Mary Ann Britland had drawn attention to the ease with which poisons could be obtained under existing law. A report from the Chief Constable of Manchester, dated August 2, 1886, noted that the first notification of suspicion came nearly 10 weeks after the initial death. The document observed that each purchase of strychnine and arsenic had been properly entered in the chemist's registers, yet no mechanism existed for cross-checking repeated entries by the same person. A signature, one official wrote, is not in itself a safeguard when no inquiry follows. The report recommended that all poison sales be logged centrally, and that constables make monthly inspections of such records. Further commentary came from medical officers who pointed to the original death certificates. It was remarked that the attending doctor had seen similar symptoms in 3 patients within a short span, and yet had issued each certificate without further examination. The margin note "natural causes" was copied verbatim each time. At a subsequent meeting of the Ashton Borough Council, councillor remarks were recorded in the minutes. The system relies too much on personal trust. A pattern may pass unnoticed until it is too late. The chairman replied that new guidelines would be sought from London regarding chemical sales and domestic insurance practices. Newspapers repeated these extracts in brief paragraphs, placing them beside small advertisements for patent medicines and tonic powders. No official blame was assigned. The constabulary simply acknowledged that delays in notification contributed to the continuation of events. By September, the file was complete. The poison registers were returned to their owners, and the correspondence was folded into the Home Office archive under reference HO 140, 1886. The final note read, "Procedures under review. No further action required." Outside the offices, the rain cleared over Manchester. The pavement steamed in the late sun, and the streets returned to their usual noise. On the morning of August 9th, 1886, Mary Ann Britland was led from her cell at Strangeways Prison, Manchester. The governor, the chaplain, and the executioner James Berry walked beside her. She needed support when crossing the yard. At the foot of the scaffold she spoke once quietly, "I am innocent." The warrant was read. At 8 o'clock the drop fell. The execution lasted less than a minute. Official witnesses signed their names, and the record was sealed. Outside the gates a few onlookers waited for confirmation, then dispersed without comment. The prison clock struck the 1/4 Later that day the press issued short notices, "Execution of the Ashton woman, sentence carried out at Strangeways." No image accompanied the text, only the closing line, "She made no confession." In Turner Lane the houses stood as before. The summer air carried the smell of dye from the mills and the sound of carts on the cobbles. A few neighbours spoke of the case when the postman passed. Others chose not to. The Britland house remained empty, its windows shuttered against the light. Years later her name still appeared in small discussions of poisoning cases and insurance fraud. Some said she had acted alone, others doubted the evidence. None knew more than the reports. When evening comes in, Ashton-under-Lyne, the lamps burn low along the lane.